Now that we're using increasingly difficult queries within MySQL, we're going to want to start to use procedures so that we can reuse code rather than typing the same things over and over again. These are roughly the equivalent of functions for most of the programming languages, or methods if you're using Java. The syntax to create a new function or procedure is create procedure. Then the name of the procedure, which we're just going to call staff function. And then brackets. If you want to pass any variables across, you can do, but you would need to almost adopt a Java-esque syntax, because we need to define both the name of the fields that we're passing across as well as the actual data type. Unlike most programming languages, we don't use curly braces to actually define the scope of a function. Instead, we use the words begin and end. SQL is also not a very complex language when it comes to functions or procedures. And so if we was to type a statement here, so for example select all from the staff table, we're going to get this error message because we're using the semicolon here, which is the delimiter, which basically tells SQL that that's the end of the statement, whereas it's actually not. The end is the actual end of the statement. And so when we're using procedures, especially when we're defining procedures, we need to temporarily change the delimiter so that we can actually create a working procedure for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to type delimiter, and we're just going to use anything that is not going to be used very frequently. So we're just going to change this to delimiter, so it's spelled correctly. And as you can see, all of the error messages have now disappeared. And because we've actually used this delimiter to change what the actual delimiter MySQL is recognising, we're able to insert multiple select statements now. And so we can save this by just running the command, which will create a new procedure for us in our table. And if we delete all of this, or in fact just comment it out, we can actually call this procedure by typing call and then procedure name, so staff function. Now we've not actually specified a job title here because we've not actually used it within the code, but if you just type an empty string so that MySQL recognises the fact that you have actually passed that argument across, and then run this command, it will actually execute the command for you. So just from one line now, we're able to execute these two select statements. If you want to drop a command or a function, the syntax is just the same as you would expect for any drop command. So you type drop, the type of drop that you're typing, and then the name. Now that function is gone. And what we can do now is we can actually use the variable that we pass across, the job title. And you use the actual variable as though it's a fully established field within the table, because we've established this within the actual function now, within the procedure. So if we run this again, we're going to recreate that procedure and we'll comment it back out. And then we'll call staff function. And this time we're going to type cook. So that's going to run the procedure. It's going to look for everyone whose job title is cook. And of course we can change this to anything we want. So now we've identified just the managers. Now we've only obviously used the select statement within our procedure so far, but as you're creating your own database, it's very useful to create procedures for updating tables, because it allows you to actually perform validation on the data before it's actually entered into the table. And this means that you don't need to then perform that validation within your PHP or Ruby script. You can do everything from within MySQL, which actually belongs and relates to the MySQL data. This is where a lot of web developers in particular fall down, because very commonly web developers will actually create all of these select statements, all of these update statements within their PHP code or within their Ruby code. But then a single change to the MySQL database will prevent all of those codes from running. If you manage your MySQL database from within an actual SQL editor, such as MySQL Workbench, which we're using here, it's much easier to remember which tables relate to which, and to actually perform any testing on all of the queries that you're going to do if you use functions and procedures to actually manage them. It's about being in a different state of mind when you're actually creating your database and maintaining your database, compared to when you're creating your website and maintaining your website. While it is possible to update directly from things like PHP and Ruby, you're adding in dependencies that don't necessarily need to be there. If you went ahead and created procedures for all of the inserts you needed to do within your database, and then calls that insert procedure from PHP, you're removing that dependency, and the procedure actually becomes like an API into your database, instead of having this closely knit relationship that most web developers tend to establish. We can of course do a whole lot more with procedures that we haven't covered yet, but we will cover that within the next few videos within this series.